Manmohan Singh speaks so softly that he has a special mic so that he can be heard. But he's not one of those guys. No? Modi is. After all, he's a mass murderer. So therefore, when we look, we have to look at the correlation and the juxtaposition and joining of globalization and human rights. The last thing I want to do is also talk of democratic rights, which sometimes are taken for granted, but they have their own specificities. For example, there should be a democratic right for each citizen to have adequate welfare, to have adequate education, to have a place to live, have access to protection like the police and all that, and should have access to information. What really is happening in my country? Now you see various leaders in our country who are giving tablets, those kind of tablets, to people. That's very good, but if they gave a bit of electricity, it would be even better. And or giving bicycles to women, excellent, because otherwise the new roads they have made, hardly anyone goes on them. Poverty in Bihar is such. So you bicycle. It's okay if you're Jean Drèze, the economist, who has the stamina of an ox, travels all over the place in summer. But these women are obviously not Jean Drèze, who's about 6'4" or whatever. So, the last thing I want to say is the intermediary types. Who are the intermediary types? And mind you, some of these are very great names, but questions need to be asked of them also. Take, for example, Amartya Sen. Amartya Sen is a great thinker, a great economist, but where has he come out with a frontal attack on globalization? Where has he come out with a frontal attack on neoliberalism? In fact, whatever little is radical in his book, I think Jean has 3 or 4 books shared with him. It's only there, in Jean's section. In fact, when we were on a yatra, 1,000 kilometers to the right of rural people to employment, the heat was bad, so we read the book. And lastly, what is the way out? Well, I think we must be clear that all our projects, all our investment should be something that works for the poor. We must have our own Human Rights Commission, like the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, to which I've had the pleasure of going a number of times. We need something like all of you and Colin's work, but on an expanded scale, so that we challenge the prevailing relations of law. We show the weakness of law compared with globalization and democratic rights. Mind you, the challenge is there. In Parliament now, there was a scandal about Robert Vadra. So, very simple. The Congress went there and stood in the well. Parliament adjourned. But when in the Rajya Sabha, the Vice President of India, who was the chair of the Rajya Sabha, and who, unlike most of the members of the Rajya Sabha, is literate, when he said, this is becoming anarchy, there were massive objections. But if there's commotion in a house, what do you say about anarchy? You can't say do wrestling otherwise. So Indian democracy is changing. and it is not changing in a radical direction. And for that, it is essential that we have a rainbow coalition, which means people of every type of movement must have a chance of being included. There must be democratic functioning within the coalition. We can't say we are for democratic rights and not practice them ourselves. And we must divide up our resources, so we choose strategic areas to criticize this so-called development model and to demand better human rights. You know, Abraham Lincoln, in a famous speech in the Gettysburg Address, talked of the need for equality between what were then called the blacks, now Afro-Americans, and the whites. And he said that no house that is divided against itself can long endure. This house is increasingly divided against itself. One quick thing. We have this great love-hate relationship with Pakistan. In fact, I've come from deleting 7 posts on my Facebook because they all said I was a Pakistani agent, I was a terrorist agent. Most of them knew I was from JNU, some of my students. Now, I think the importance of building good neighborly relations and challenging militarist policies by this country should be a preeminent goal. After all, the most important right is the right to life. There was, of course, a furor. 5 Indian soldiers were killed. That happens in battle. But what about the Pakistani soldiers who were killed earlier? There's no jingoism about that because they're, of course, Pakistanis. But not just that. You will remember, Indians, that there was a big furor about beheading. The beheading of soldiers. Yes or no? Yes. Well, then Praveen Swami, who in his earlier incarnation was quite a hawk, he quoted the Pakistanis that they had appealed to the UN observers on the border and they had given a detailed report on how their people had been beheaded. When I checked all papers, I found in 3 they had mentioned beheading. But in no other paper and no discussion, including of the left, mind you, and I feel very bad because that's a hope for us and I'm in it. There was nothing about beheading. And now it's become part of common discussion. Oh, Pakistan, they beheaded our guys. Why did they behead? Because you also beheaded. And if you know anything about the Gurkha regiment, for them it's common. The famous case of the peacekeepers in the Congo. And the Gurkhas were outnumbered. So they notoriously told the Congo, Katanga people, that if you don't go, we'll play football with your heads. So these guys haven't changed. They're very good light infantry, but they're very ruthless. Unless ordered not to. So, and the press is full of this. Of course, I wrote a post on that and got love letters on that also. So, I really think that, like my comments on the dais, that there is a need for more and more interaction between activists, lawyers, constitutional experts, economists. And once we do all that, we translate it to much simpler language so that the poorer or lower middle class can understand. Because there is one problem, serious problem with globalization. You can have globalization plus human rights only so far. After that, it's gone. And other things mount. For instance, in Kishtwar, the Jammu region of Kashmir, there was a riot. some of us, as a conditioned reflex, and I've been in that area, said that this has been done by the communalists. Oh boy, what a fight there was. The next day, the Economic Times, the Indian Express, and Greater Kashmir said that this was an attack by the Village Defense Committee, a notorious organization, arming civilians, so they're able to kill other civilians, or technically